This metro offers its residents underground transport 24 hours a day, year-round. Coney Island is the depot from which many of the trains pull out. This is the largest such facility in the world, where over 1,000 carriages are stored, scrubbed and serviced before they set out to cover the 230 miles that make up the system. Some have been turned into a rolling art form, at least in the eyes of the graffiti fiends. Many more have been replaced or reconditioned in a major offensive led by the city's transit authority to revitalize their stock. From the moment the first train started running in 1904, New Yorkers have shown an affinity for the clank and clatter of steel wheels on rail, and, despite its many shortcomings, every day over 3.5 million people still travel on the world's most celebrated subway. There are even a few who have traveled the entire length of the system, passing through the 463 stations that serve 4 of New York's 5 boroughs: Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Manhattan. 3 routes, the Interborough Rapid Transport, or IRT, Brooklyn Manhattan Transit, or BMT, and the IND for Independent, all converge on Manhattan Island, the nerve center of both city and subway. This is the New York known to millions who will never visit it. Below, less than 1 million people live in Manhattan, but every day over 5 million come to work or play there. The vast majority, 85% and rising, are transported by subway. David Gunn was appointed president of the New York City Transit Authority in 1984. His first task was to deal with the problems that had arisen in the mid-70s when the city almost went broke and crime, dirt and deterioration had driven thousands of riders off the subway and onto surface transport systems.
The city of New York cannot function without the subway. And the quality of the subway service has an impact in innumerable areas in this city. And there's no question in my mind that the city suffered as a result of the reputation of the New York City subway system, as the subway system has to ride that subway system at one time or another. And so you see a complete cross-section of this city when you ride the subway system. They're all there. Everybody's down there. It's not only transportation, it's entertainment.
59th Street, the southern border of Central Park, and a frontier of sorts between Midtown and Uptown, between one way of life and another. Midtowners, who own some of the most expensive apartments in the world, meet Uptowners campaigning for basic rent controls. Little more in common than the daily dependence on the subway. The fare's the same for everyone. A $1 token takes you as far as you want to go. The social melting pot of New York never stops boiling. The earlier immigrant communities of European Jews, Italians, Irish, gave way to blacks, Hispanics, and Orientals. To the newcomers, usually poor and confused, the subway was as essential as ever. But even they tried to avoid using it. When a passenger used a gun against muggers, there was applause, but many New Yorkers saw their worst fears realized. Even without Bernard Goetz, the New York press has always ensured that subway travelers were fully aware of the risks they take.
Obviously, what you're dealing with is the perception of
if David Gunn were to ride out into Brownsville, East New York, and Brooklyn through the South Bronx, he'd probably need rubber underwear and a bulletproof vest. He'd have a far different view of the subway system that he feels is getting so much better. 149th Grand Concourse. All right, so make sure you spread out on the cars once we get in.
Curtis Sliwa is self-appointed leader of the Gardian Angels, a group of young vigilantes who strode out of the badlands of the South Bronx and into the city's imagination. The idea came to Sliwa, he claims, while he was a regular passenger on Train 4, the Muggers Express. The authorities regard the Angels with suspicion, although the mayor of New York welcomed their efforts. They have no particular authority. Should they catch anyone committing a crime, they can, like any citizen, detain them until the police arrive. So far as the Transit Authority is concerned, they are fare-paying passengers like any others.
The further you get away from the core of the city, Manhattan, and you get into the outer boroughs, more isolated the stations, far less police, and even the physical atmosphere is more depressing and more palatable to a wide variety of criminals. Assume that you were the victim of crime. You had just been robbed of your money, or raped, or attacked. Would you have been roaming about many minutes looking for police? Or might you not have just gotten back on the train, gone home, said some prayers, and thanked God that you were still alive? That's what typically happens to many victims. They can't stand around waiting for police. So when you see Guardian Angels in the subway train or on the platform, you feel better because you say, out of all the people who may be here at this point, if I were to be targeted by some criminal, pickpocket, jostler, sexual deviant, I know that these young men in the red berets will risk their life to defend me, even though they may not even know me, may be of different color or a different background. We're just about as close as you can get to those kind of superheroes, those comic book cartoon heroes that exist in real life. And the best thing is they're real people.
The Guardian Angels have since expanded their operations above ground to the more threatening neighborhoods served by the subway. Times Square, crossroads of the city, has lost much of its luster since the 20s and 30s, and today drug dealers of all kinds, particularly those specializing in the debilitating crack, share the sidewalk with bewildered tourists and Broadway theatergoers, all of them trying to dodge the hell-bent cab. This is New York at its most manic, and not surprisingly, the subway stop below has the system's highest crime rate. With 250,000 people passing through its maze of corridors and tunnels every day, it's also the most heavily patrolled. The Transit Police of New York are the 5th largest force in the country, with a jurisdiction that requires specialist training for underground crime fighting.
From the environment.
Can you wait on the steps? Can you get up the steps, please? Go sit over there. Can you get up the steps? Blocking the traffic here. It's a dangerous place to sit. Okay?
Every weekend, Grand Central Station is flooded with New Yorkers evacuating town. But deep below the grandeur of its concourse, there are daily dramas.
This train is being rerouted to Woodlawn Road. Disregard the signs, this Uptown number 6 being rerouted to Woodlawn and Jerome. We have extensive delays at this time. This number 6 train will be going to Woodlawn and Jerome.
A fire in the old wooden sleepers of the elevated tracks creates a familiar delay for the beleaguered controllers to deal with. At times, it seems this antiquated system is held together by rubber bands and string, a miracle that it works at all. It relies heavily on services like the city fire department. Less than half the $4 billion or so a year the subway needs to operate is raised from fares, and the shortfall must be made up by reluctant tax and road toll payers. There's never enough money to go round. The neglects of the 1970s forced safety to the top of the agenda for the transit authorities. To regain public confidence, their immediate priority has been upgrading maintenance facilities, rolling stock, and tracks. The big cleanup, they call it.
The New York City subway system had fallen on hard times. Basically, the entire physical plant was a wreck. The car fleet was a wreck. It was covered with graffiti. It was dirty. It didn't work well. Had tremendous deferred maintenance. The track was in real serious trouble. And all of the other infrastructure items, pumps, fans, and so forth, were in serious trouble.